All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the May 2023 MSMF Wealth Management Podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Jay Peters and Cody Redding. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
I would say at some point our clients need to ask us about the outtakes, but that's not today. Anyway, what we're going to do today is we're going to do kind of the MSMF version of our mailbag. It's really, we're going to talk about the three most common questions we're getting right now relative to what's going on in this wonderful world of ours, right? Specifically, we're going to talk about all the things surrounding the debt ceiling. We're going to talk about, we've been beat over the head about recession. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the quote-unquote sunset of the 2017 tax cuts. Good?
Good.
All right.
Sounds great.
Top three.
Let's dive right in on the top three hot topics. Jay, talk to me about what is the debt ceiling?
Sure. So the debt ceiling, first let's come from, why do we have a debt ceiling? If you go back to 1917, that's when the debt ceiling was first
I was
implemented.
not alive then. I know you think I was, but I wasn't.
Good to know. With that, the Congress was tired of trying to approve every single bond that was issued. So they said, hey, let's just make a ceiling. As long as you're under that, we're good, right? Fast forward 100 years, and it doesn't work that way anymore. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. And really, it's the way that the government is using to pay Medicare, Social Security, lots of different government, anything you can think of that the government pays for. It's probably being paid for at some point through the debt ceiling, right? Specifically, whenever we have a deficit, in which case our budget deficit has been running for 40 years now. Mm-hmm. So we tap into this debt ceiling quite often. And what happens a lot of times is when we run up to the edge of it, we're really close to it. We say, okay, are we going to cut spending, or are we going to just raise it up and kick the can down the road? Essentially, right. Most of the time they just keep kicking it down the road, right? Now, there was one time, I think it was in 2011, where it was actually within hours of actual not, passing or whatever. So that was one time. It was pretty chaotic. They were shutting a bunch of things down, if you remember. Right. Not fun. Don't really want to do that again. Right. So that's kind of what the debt ceiling is. Should I talk about?
Yeah. So, we're hearing a lot about it right now. Why is it important today here in May of 2023?
Well, it's funny that it's important in May when we actually crossed the debt ceiling in January.
Funny. We didn't hear about that, did we? It was the best kept secret in Washington.
Yeah. So in January, I think it was the 19th. Yeah, January 19th, we already hit the debt ceiling. We already passed it. But the Treasury Department actually can use what they call extraordinary measures.
Oh, okay.
Go look up what that means, because you can't really find out what that means. But basically, they can pull strings, forego some payments, pay this person instead of that one, kind of a thing behind the scenes, to try and buy some time to figure out what to do with the debt ceiling. Well, the reason why it's a hot topic right now is because they've already been employing all these strategies, and they've bought time to about June 1st is what they're predicting, anywhere from June to, I think you said September, Cody.
September, yeah, it all depends on, I guess, how much tax income they received and how long that will allow the debt ceiling to be over, I guess. So there's only so much extraordinary measurement the Treasury can do. But yet we don't know what that is either.
We don't precisely know what that is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so interesting, it's based on tax revenue because, again, we're talking about deficit spending, and that affects the debt ceiling, right? So the more deficit we're in, well, the faster we're going to hit the ceiling. So anyway, that's why it's important right now, because now we have literal days until we actually run out of money and the government has to make some sort of decision on what they're going to shut down, whether they're not going to pay. Are they going to not send Social Security checks? I doubt it, but, we'll see what they do.
And the net result is, quote unquote, we default on our obligations. Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah, that's one of the consequences. There's several different things that can happen, and that's probably one of the scariest because right now the credit, everybody has like a credit score. If you think about the United States credit score, it's pretty high.
Right.
Basically the world's currency in other terms, right? And so you don't really want to mess up that. That would really affect a lot of things.
So, by the way, where can someone go to see what the U.S. national debt is?
I forget, Cody. What's
I think it's usdebtclock.org.
That's right.
usdebtclock.org.
And there's a lot of numbers on there.
Flash her up on the screen. We'll show everybody an example of it.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah. So, all right, that's very helpful. So, Cody, particularly from our client's perspective, why do we care? What are the consequences?
Yeah, so the consequences of not coming to an agreement with what the new debt ceiling should be, I mean, it will hit every kind of financial faucet you could think of. So from the high level view, U.S. has 60% of the global currency. It's in U.S. dollar denomination, while the U.S. is backed by the bonds that are issued. If the Treasury can't basically meet the obligations of the bonds, then all of a sudden they're defaulted on. And that would send the dollar tanking, which would be good if you're, exporting goods, right? So, but importing not a good thing. So it would basically cause global havoc across all the economies of the world. Government's not able to borrow money. They can't pay the employees. They can't put out Social Security checks, Medicare, and all that kind of would cease to exist at that point. I think they said about 10% of economic activity would just basically stop instantly because of the government interactions with it. Stock market, because of that, would certainly most likely decline. And it would obviously lead to higher unemployment, lower wages. So a snowball effect of a lot of things that would probably instantly put us into a recession. It's basically what would happen. Now, I would have to believe that the powers that be in the Congress don't want that to happen, and I think some sort of agreement will be happening here soon.
Yeah, but all those bad consequences is why we've never really defaulted and done this.
Correct. In 2013, I think kind of like in 2011, it came very close to the debt deadline.
Yeah.
And it was actually the first and only time that the U.S. debt was, went from, I think, AAA to AA grade.
Right. So typically what we have, and it's the same thing now the last 45 days, regardless of who's in the White House and who's the Speaker of the House, there's a lot of chest thumping and who's going to be bigger and badder.
Right.
At the end of the day, they all man or woman up and figure out this is not a good thing for everybody across the world, let alone the citizens of the United States. Let's figure this out. Okay, so our clients, what do they need to be doing right now with their portfolios? I mean, anything? Should they be careful? Should they be fearful? Should they be going to cash? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's not anything new. It's happened, dozens of times where we've had the debt ceiling coming up to the deadline and it has been passed. So I don't think that causes any frighten or scare. Really, there's nothing to do. Now, can there be some volatility that leads up to it as it draws closer to the deadline? Sure, absolutely. But tomorrow they could come out and say the debt ceiling, they came to an agreement, and all of a sudden the market, goes up. So,
Right.
There's really not much to do with it. We just wanted to let kind of people know what it is and
Right.
what would be the consequences if something were
Right.
to happen.
And the tea leaves right now are it's going to get figured out, and by the time people are listening to this, we may be past it.
Right. Hopefully.
Okay, excellent. All right. So, Jay, I referred to the kind of the debt ceiling thing. That's just kind of the sideshow right now. But it's all over the news. It gets people concerned. But to your and Cody's point, it's going to get figured out. At least we believe it is. Let's talk about a bigger elephant in the room. This thing called a recession that we've been hearing about literally for probably since the Fed started on their massive rate hike journey a year and a half ago. Let's start with, what is a recession?
Yeah, so the textbook, definition or whatever is really when you have two negative GDP quarters in a row, right? That's just kind of the everybody accepts that that's the easy way of thinking about it, right? But then there's actually a committee who gets together and they look at all of the economic data. They look at the jobs. They look at the stock market, for example, and they say, okay, we were in a recession. They never come out and tell you when you are.
Until after the fact.
And sometimes it's even a year after it's even happened.
Yeah, oh,
They'll
by the
go
way.
back and confirm.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what it is because it's several different factors that I was just trying to go through. But it's important to know that it's when the economy is getting smaller.
Right.
Right. That's the biggest. That's the receding part of the recession.
Sure.
Right. The
Yeah.
economy is getting smaller.
Gotcha. So, and I kind of alluded to it, the unprecedented rate action the Fed's taken the last year and a half kind of leads into, in English for all of us and our clients, why are we concerned about all this talk about a recession?
Sure. So in your everyday things, that could affect your job. It could affect prices at the grocery store. It could affect your life that way.
Worse than what it's been the last year and a half.
Oh, yes.
Jeez, great.
Yes, and that's what the Fed was trying to do, right?
Right.
They're trying to slow down the economy without putting it,
Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And then as an investor, though, now we're talking about, well, my investments, what is the stock market going to be doing? What are the bond markets going to be doing based on a recession, right? And so that's where, that we've had 3 different recessions since the 21st century that we are for sure of, because, we could be in one right now, and if you count last year, too,
Right.
I kind of feel like we probably are in one right now.
Amen
You
to
guys-
that.
yeah.
Totally.
You think so, too, Cody?
Yeah, if we're just going to go off of the easy definition of 2 negative quarters in a row of GDP, I got some numbers here. It would have been in after the first and second quarter of last year, first quarter being negative 1.6 and second quarter of 2022 being negative 0.6. You could technically say that we are in a recession, or have been in a recession, or currently are in a recession now.
Right.
But those other economic indicators like, unemployment, which is still near record lows right now,
Right.
all play into that. So it makes it really hard to judge on what actually is a recession,
Right.
which kind of leads to, does it really matter if we are in a recession or not, right?
Right.
And
As an investor.
as an investor. So, go back to 2022, when we think of the economy and we think of our investments, they usually kind of go hand in hand, right? But we saw definitely a difference of, we had really good economic indicators and factors in 2022, but yet the stock market went down, right? I think at one point the S&P was down 26% in June, I believe. I think it closed out the year a little bit below 18%.
Right. In that neighborhood.
So some recovery from there.
Right.
And when, we talked about 2 quarters of GDP.
Right.
That was in June of 2022, and that's kind of when we hit the last bottom of the market per se. So have had some recovery since then. But yet this year we have, you hear headlines about hiring freezes, some layoffs, and focusing on, are we in a recession now, or are we going to lead up to a recession? Last year it was like, 6 months from now we're going to be in a recession. Now they're saying, it's the end of 23 or maybe into 24. So that can keeps getting kicked down the road. And I think all it has to do with the data that's coming out, and what we thought would be really, really bad isn't as bad as we thought. So the market's starting to recover from that.
Right.
Some interesting stats too is, since World War II, I think we've had 13 recessions. And the average return during the recession, so not before or after, but just during it, it was about 1% positive return. So if you think we're going into a recession now, would not probably be the time to get out, just looking at history. And, also going back from World War II, 1 year after we are officially in a recession, or when they say it started, the market was positive every single time, except when we had a recession in 2001, which ended November 30th of 2001, and we had 9/11 happen. So that was near the end of the recession, and that hurt that 1 year return. But 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years after, the S&P 500, and data I'm getting is from First Trust, has been positive during those times. So it always goes back to, it's really hard to know when to get out and get in, and the best thing is to have a strategy and keep that in place, and not have a knee-jerk reaction.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll share that on the screen so people can see it. And I like what Jay said, because Well, I do like what you said too. I think practically speaking, it feels like we've been in one
Right.
for quite some time.
Right.
Right. And I like what you said in that, as long as we're maintaining, particularly in our investment portfolio, discipline and rebalancing if it gets out of whack, as long as our risk score is consistent with the way our portfolio is positioned, there's no need to be, taking knee-jerk reactions and getting all panicked and doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Because based on your data, what comes typically, again, no guarantee, but what comes after a recession, it makes sense. The market comes down or the economy is down and then the economy bounces back. Well, the economy bounces back and the market's looking at those traditional factors, then historically the market's going to bounce back to some perspective as well.
Yep.
So it's really like we do all the time with our clients, it's constantly taking that temperature of the risk score, the risk comfort zone, and making sure the portfolio represents that. All right, so let's transition to our last thing in the mailbag. Excuse me, the sunset of the world famous 2017 tax cuts, right? Insert all the jokes on that you want to. All right, so what I like to say is there is a coming tax tornado, which you've joked about, find your shelter. Your tax shelter.
Tax shelter.
It's pretty good. Boom, boom, boom. You're a week, right? So what I mean by this coming tax tornado is that, again, the provisions of the 2017 tax cuts are going to sunset, meaning they're going to expire and automatically revert back on January 1st of 2026 to the rates that were there prior to that. And we talked about it before, I know, on the individual tax rates. The lower end rates stay the same, but the income goes down. And then on the middle and higher rates, not only does the rate go up, but the income comes down substantially. So, Jay, talk to me a little bit about what that means on a marginal tax rate. What's that mean to clients that these rates are going to change? How's that impacting them?
That means for the average middle-class American, you're going to be paying more taxes.
Right.
I mean, just
Plain
to
and
keep
simple,
it
right?
short and sweet. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead on you,
No, you're
but
good.
the other factor of that is also the standard deduction.
All of it, right?
With the original tax cuts, that made the standard deduction so much greater that a lot of people were itemizing because they were getting a better benefit from it. That sort of a thought process. Plus, the tax rates were coming down, right? And the middle class was widening at the same time. So there was three good things, and now those are all three undoing. So the average person is going to be paying more in taxes,
Right.
If they made the same income, obviously.
Right.
So-
And I think, Cody, there was a giant misconception, or maybe it wasn't a misconception, but it was a talking point by a certain side of the political aisle that somehow those tax cuts only benefit people in the highest brackets. But that's not true, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the current tax cuts we have now, the standard deduction is twice what it was before 2017.
Which benefits everybody.
And that also grows with inflation.
Right.
So, you take that away and automatically people are going to most likely have more taxes due.
Right.
Unless you're able to deduct, a high real estate tax and mortgages and items like that. But even you'd have to have quite a bit of mortgage interest to make it worthwhile to be able to itemize in today's world.
Right.
So there's I think misnomer about needing to have debt so you can itemize. It's like, well, no matter what, if you're paying that debt interest, that is money that's not going in your pocket no
Right.
matter what.
Right.
So no, it's just not a good thing.
Right.
No matter what tax bracket you're in, really.
Right. Yeah, and again, just go back to the conversation about the debt ceiling, right? Well, I call that the sideshow. There's a huge amount of debt on the U.S. government's balance sheet that at the end of the day we're all responsible for. So not only are these tax rates going to go away on January 1st of 2026, if we look out 5, 10, 15 years, I really have a hard time believing that we're not headed towards continually higher tax rates in order to rein in that spending. I mean, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point I was going to make. This whole debt ceiling, it's all connected, right? And so it's deficit spending, and it's part of the revenue that's generated from taxes is a big part of that equation. And these tax cuts, if they go back to the way they are, or if they do something different, because who knows, they might do something completely radically different by the time we get there,
Right.
too. But, I think they're going to need to do some sort of tax raise to cover all these obligations that we have.
Right. And so, Cody, along those lines, when we look, and I know you guys do the same thing with your clients as I do, we kind of look at 3 different buckets, right? Taxable investments, tax-free investments, and tax-deferred investments, right? And I'm not going to go into all the different accounts as it relates to that, but when I look at 2023, 2024, and 2025, the mix we have in taxable, tax-free versus tax-deferred, knowing this tax tornado is coming, the strategy is ultimately, do we shift some of those buckets? So, in terms of that bucket shifting, talk to me about if we have a tax deferred and we want to go to one of these other buckets, what's that look like for someone?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, just saying, okay, we're here today, and we know in 2026 this is going to change.
Right, and that's all we know.
That's
right
all
now.
we know today.
To your point of long term, we got to plan with what we know.
Exactly.
So we've had conversations with clients about do we take, considering we think taxes might be more in the future, do we start taking some payments out of the IRAs and converting them to Roths and paying the lesser tax amount today,
Right.
Because in the future we think it's going to be higher. I
Right.
mean, that's been a pretty big strategy from that standpoint.
Right.
As far as taxable gain rates, those should stay the same. So doesn't really leave anything to that, unless there's always talks about that going away too.
Always
right?
change capital
Every year.
gains tax.
So I think if that's going to go away, you'll see a lot of people taking gains.
Right.
And is it more worthwhile to actually put my 401k deferrals into the Roth today?
Correct.
Versus doing the traditional route.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, again, with the sunset of tax cuts, what is it? Taxes are on sale today. We got 3 years. Now, we don't know what they're going to be after 1/1/26. We plan with what we know. We know they're lower today, right? So that's the what and the when. The how is this whole bucket shifting of, do we go tax deferred to tax free? Do we go tax deferred to taxable? You talked about the Roth. There's other options out there that may or may not be appropriate for people. You have municipal bonds. And literally, you have now today, what was once old is now new again, is cash value life insurance. So there's a variety of different strategies that always have to be tailored to somebody's particular situation. But that's the things that we're talking about with clients when this question comes up, is the tornado's coming, we got to get into our shelter. Okay? All right, so that's our mailbag: debt ceiling, recession, and sunset of 2017 tax cuts. Jay, final thoughts?
The thought number one is, this is just more noise. You know what I mean? We say this, I feel like, every podcast, but I'm going to say it again. This is why we have reviews with our clients. This is why we look at how much overall risk we're taking, because there's always going to be some sort of noise that kind of changes that picture. And to me, this is more noise. So as long as we have a good strategy in place, I think our clients are in a good spot.
Excellent. Cody?
Yeah, with Jay, strategy being the number one important thing, knowing why you're invested in and what you're invested in. Data to back up. We talked about what actually happens during recessionary periods and the returns, so it's not as gloom as doom as everyone would paint the picture out to be. And debt ceilings. This has happened a lot of times. This is nothing new. But it's going to be in the headlines because it has a date to it, right? So with Jay on it, a lot of noise. We always come through it. At the end of the day, it can create short-term volatility, but nothing for the long term.
Right. Yeah, and the only thing my bow on it is, again, that's why collectively, the three of us, Chris and Craig behind the board over there, and everyone else in the office, we keep an eye on all this stuff and try to bring that into our meetings with clients and in specifically to the strategies. So I hope everybody got a benefit out of this. If any of your friends, family, colleagues could benefit from this information, we'll send a link out via text. Give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email. Happy to talk to anybody about this, particularly if they're a little bit too close to the ledge. For your comfort zone, call us, we'll bring them back. And in closing, I don't know if was your baby born the last time we did this?
I think we did it right before.
Yeah, so now you both have 2 young children.
That's right.
So I just want to know what everyone thinks the over-under is on who ends up with more kids. Because we're all 3 tied, and I'm not having any more kids. So I want to know the over-under on who's going to win the
I want to see that too.
kid trophy. All right, well, thank you very much for watching. Have a great May. We're going to have to help those Cardinals because we are floundering at the moment, but hopefully next month we have better things to report. Talk to you soon.